Now let's throw an elif into the mix. Elif stands for else if. It's just shortened into one word. As before, we have a single if statement that checks if it's raining. We have an else statement that prints t-shirt and shorts if the previous ifs didn't trigger. But now we've added this intermediate elif statement. This says elif today's weather equals cold. Like an else, an elif only runs if the previous if block did not run. But like an if, it can have a logical expression attached to it. So it only runs if the previous if blocks did not run, but it also has its own condition to check. It doesn't just run regardless. So when this code runs, as before, it gets to line 5, checks to see if the value of today's weather is raining, and sees that no, it's not. So it skips lines 6 and 7, because those were indented underneath that if statement. It then runs line 9, and at this point, line 9 is basically just like another if statement. The previous if block did not run, so this one will, or at least it will try to. It checks to see if today's weather equals cold, finds that it does, and so lines 10 and 11 do run. And so we see a long sleeve shirt and scarf in our output. Now it runs to line 13. Note that line 12 should actually say if today's weather didn't equal raining or cold. And line 13 is an else. This means to only run this block of code if none of the previous ifs actually triggered, or if they were actually true. But remember, the second one was. It was cold. And so because one of our conditionals did run, the else doesn't run. And it skips lines 14 and 15. And then finally it runs line 16 to print done again. This code skipped lines 6 and 7 because that first if statement was not true. But it skipped lines 14 and 15 because a previous conditional had already run. And an else only runs if all the previous conditionals didn't run. And as we said in our example, we can actually have more than one of these else ifs. Here we've added 3. If it's raining, wear a raincoat and rain boots. Otherwise, if it's cold, wear a long sleeve shirt and scarf. Otherwise, if it's windy, wear a jacket. Otherwise, if it's snowy, wear snow boots. And otherwise, if it's none of the previous conditions, then wear a t-shirt and shorts. As our code runs, it checks each conditional and runs the indented or controlled code if that condition is true. On line 5, today's weather is not raining, so it skips line 6 and 7, the indented lines under line 5. On line 9, it's also not true that today's weather is cold, so it skips lines 10 and 11. On line 13, though, it is true that today's weather is windy, and so it does run line 14, and so we see jacket in our output. Now because the conditional on line 13 ran, it doesn't even matter what the conditional on line 16 is. Line 17 won't run regardless, and neither will lines 20 and 21 because they're controlled by this else. This block only runs if none of the previous conditionals ran, and as we saw, the third conditional did run.